Okay, thanks. Well, it's great to be here with you today and to give you a very brief overview of the Cascades Butterfly Project and where we are right now on it. So next slide. The Cascades Butterfly Project is a community science project. It's a long-term monitoring program that was developed or designed to monitor the effects of climate change on subalpine meadows using butterflies and plant phenology as our indicators. It was jointly developed by North Cascades and Mount Rainier staff or biologists. Next, please. So why do we select butterflies and flowering plants? As you may be aware, the North Coast and Cascades network of 7 parks started a long-term monitoring program in 2000. And at that time, we kept bringing up pollinators and that this should be one of our indicators, but we really couldn't address it at the time. So the other biologists and I decided we had heard about a long-term monitoring program at Rocky Mountain National Park focused on butterflies using community scientists. Thought this would be a good model for us. We selected butterflies and plants because they are sensitive to both temperature and precipitation. They depend on each other. And although butterflies are not important pollinators in the subalpine, they are indicative of what the other pollinators, the ants, bees, and syrphid flies are, their populations. We also selected butterflies and plants because they're both fairly easy to identify, especially if you keep the list short, and because there were long-term butterfly monitoring programs in Europe and elsewhere in the United States, and we would be able to compare our results with those programs. Next. So in our, we have both short and long-term objectives. When we started this project, started developing it in 2008, we did some literature searches and record searches. And we were working with Dr. John McLaughlin at Western Washington University and Dr. Dana Garrigan at PLU. And we found that although we did see presence-absence records at Mount Rainier, there were very few in the Northern Cascades. So I'm addressing the whole ecosystems, which if you're familiar with the North Cascades Adaptation Partnership, the 2 forests that we're looking at, Mount Baker-Snoqualmie and Okanagan-Wenatchee, as well as North Cascades and Mount Rainier National Parks, work together on the 6 million acres to look forward as to what changes we might see. So across this ecosystem, we only found records of 70 butterflies in Mount Rainier and 40 in the Northern Cascades. That's the 2 forests and North Cascades National Park. So our first short-term objective was we could really expand our butterfly inventories and we could get out there and talk to people that might not be in visitor centers to get information from them, but also let them know about climate change and the effects that we are projecting in subalpine meadows. As far as long-term trends, we really wanted to focus on butterfly flight time and abundance, butterfly species richness, and plant flowering times. Next slide. So I'm only going to focus on the quantitative butterfly surveys today in this 10 minutes. So we are using the Pollard-Walk method, which is a relative abundance. We have 10 study sites, which I'll show you on the next slide, that are set up in the 2 forests and the 2 parks. All the survey routes are 1 kilometer in length. They're along maintained trails, so we're protecting the meadows. And each survey route is divided into 5 200-meter segments. We try to survey minimally once a week from snowmelt to, I'll say, the first freeze. So generally it could be from mid-June to mid-September. But optimally, we really try to get surveys in 2 or 3 times a week would be great. We only survey during good butterfly weather, and we have rules for that. In this slide, you can see Eddie Silawa in North Cascades National Park on Easy Pass, and he's walking along the trail, and he's working with 1 or 2 other people. We generally work in crews of anywhere from 2 to 5. The first person is the observer, And as they walk, they have an imaginary box in front of them that's 5 by 5 by 5 meters. And any butterfly that goes in that box, he identifies to species. Often we have to catch and release just so we can really examine the butterfly to be sure of what it is. Okay, next. This map shows you where our study sites are. So from the north down, on the left side of your screen or the west, there's Skyline Divide at Mount Baker-Snoqualmie National Forest, fairly close to Jim Davis's study site. Sauk Mountain below that. And then as you move east, there's Cascade Pass on the Cascade Crest, that's North Cascades, Easy Pass in North Cascades, and Maple Pass in Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. And in Mount Rainier, starting in the northwest, going clockwise, Spray Park, Skyscraper, Natchez Loop, Sunrise Rim, and Mazama Ridge. We selected sites that would be easy walking distance, we thought, although Easy Pass is not easy, I would say, but something that we knew volunteers could get into and out of in a day. And that's why there are so few sites in the Northern Cascades, because travel time is so much greater there. Okay, next slide. And next, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of our results, and these are really, really brief. So one of our biggest questions when we started was, who could we get for volunteers? Personally, I didn't know any butterflies when we started. I might have known a monarch because I grew up in the East, but that was it. So we really didn't know, should we be recruiting volunteers that already knew butterflies? Could people learn them during the season? And who could we get to do these surveys during the week? Because we didn't want to survey on weekends because there are so many people out there. So these two graphs show you our, the x-axis on both is 2011 through 2023. We developed the program in 2008, 9, and 10, and then started surveys in 2011. On the left, you can see the bar graphs show the number of surveys per year, and the different colors are the 10 different routes. On the east, this is giving you, I mean, on the right, east side of your screen, we're looking at the survey crew composition. So one of our other objectives was we really wanted to try to get younger biologists out, college students, recent graduates in the field to see what do field biologists do within these agencies. So our crews were often made up, we were lucky enough to often get two seasonal positions, one in Mount Rainier, one in North Cascades. And then often we could get interns through the National Park Service, through Geoscientists in the Park, Mosaics in Science, or Latino Heritage. So when you look at the bar graphs on the right graph, blue means a crew was entirely made up of NPS personnel. Red means that it was a crew that was, I'll say, a hybrid between NPS and VIPs, or volunteers in parks. And green would be only volunteers doing the surveys. And these are the percent of all surveys that year. So you can see from 2011 till about 2018, we often had a lot of National Park Service people out there. And at that time, we did not require, I didn't require that people, volunteers, do a minimum number of surveys. But in 2019, that changed. So between, in 2019, we started requiring that people had to survey at least 3 times a season. And also the pandemic was a help for us because a lot of people wanted to volunteer. So you can see by 2019, we pretty much changed, and now we're completely volunteer based. All volunteers come at least 3 times a year. I think we have 3 volunteers who have been with us since 2011, but many have been there for 5 or 6 years. And some volunteers even do 8 surveys a season. Next slide. So I'm going to whip through these, but some of the things we've learned, we have documented 59 butterfly species across the 4 study areas. We can see, we have a good idea of which butterflies are most common on each site. We are beginning to see interannual variation, both in terms of abundance and timing of flight. Next slide. These are, I'll say, the 8 most abundant species we have, just to give you an idea. And these are butterflies that are seen on 9 or 10 routes. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of Anna's blue on the top left and the Arctic fritillary, which is the third from the bottom, third from the left on the bottom. Next slide. So this slide shows you, variation in flight abundance from year to year. You can see 2015, as Jim Davis mentioned, was a very early year. Snowmelt was 3 months earlier, and we had an early peak in butterflies. Plants did about the same. 2018 and 2022 were also peak years. Next slide. But later in the season. This is Arctic fritillary. The map on the right shows you by the size of the circles the percent of all Arctic fritillaries across the landscape. And you can see this is more common in Mount Rainier than in the Northern Cascades. You can also see on the graph that 2015 was an early year for Arctic frits to fly and a peak in abundance. 2023 was a little later, more when we might expect late July, early August, but a lower peak. Next, please. And I think I only have 2 slides left. So this is Anna's blue, which is the most abundant across all our routes. And you can see that on the graph that the blue is 2015, and that's an early peak, but not as high as on Arctic frit. It was early flight period, but not as high abundance. 2012 was a peak abundance, but more at the end of July, beginning of August. Next slide. And just to show you the variation among sites, on the left on this graph is Anna's blue, just the populations at Sauk Mountain. Sauk is our lowest site. It's a south-facing slope, and sometimes if the road isn't washed out, it's accessible from mid-June. So you can see that Anna's blue did fly early in 2015, but it wasn't one of the most abundant years. 2021, it was a little later, but that was a peak. And really, we didn't have very many in 2023, which I'm not sure why. On the right, you can see Mazama Ridge. That's a higher elevation. It is on a ridge, but because it's concave, it does not melt out very early. You can see even in 2015, we did have early flights of Anna's blue. And in the first week of July, we also had gentians in flower, which was really unusual. Then you can see 2023 and 2022, the peaks were later in the summer. And I think the interesting thing that we're seeing on Anna's is we have more Anna's there now than we did previously. And I know you can't remember perhaps the slide showing abundance, but those slides were developed in 2018. And Anna's blue was not one of the most abundant butterflies on Mazama Ridge, but now it is, and I'm not certain why. Okay, and then the last slide is just a picture of some of our volunteers. And John and I are working on data now, trying to see trends in butterflies and plants.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we can take one question if anyone has questions for Dr. Rochefort. John asks in the chat, any thoughts on relating snow water equivalent and snowmelt timing?
You know, I think snowmelt timing for sure. I'm not sure about the snow water equivalent. I've also been trying to look at the growing degree days, and I think probably snowmelt, but maybe I can get with you, John, for the best data sources. Yeah.
Well, Jeannie, you have like lots of questions to answer in the chat and lots of accolades. Thank you so much for your presentation.